First of all, I just want to welcome everyone, and we're excited to have an opportunity to gather people from all around the country and share some hopefully very helpful insights on advising for EM applicants. My name is Sarah Crockett. I am an associate professor of emergency medicine at Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center. I have been the EM advisor and clerkship director in emergency medicine for the past 4 years, and really have had a passion above all for advising, because it's become very clear to me that supporting students and getting them the right information can make this process of applying to residency such a less stressful process. And if you don't have good information, it can be totally overwhelming. So I'm excited that ADIEM and SAM came together to try and get good advising information out to everyone to be able to access this. So this has actually been something that's been on my mind for the past several years as I've been working on creating a more inclusive and diverse residency at our institution, recognizing some people have good access to good advising and others don't, and that can be a real disadvantage. So I just want to say how grateful I am to the leadership of these organizations that they've put the time and effort in to make this happen. So I'm excited to be here tonight, and our topic that we'll be talking about is really looking at academic and professional issues, and kind of addressing, you know, how to tackle things if you do have some red flags, and what to keep in mind is important in this category of academics and professionalism in your EM application. Right. So we're hoping that Dennis from Harbor-U will be joining us. He does have some work obligations, and so he may be joining us in a little bit. But again, I am Director of Emergency Medicine Education at Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center, which is in New Hampshire, one of the very few extremely rural academic centers in the United States. So I have a very different setting than a lot of you guys in New York and Chicago and bigger cities, but hopefully the same principles apply everywhere. All right, so I am going to invite everyone. I just have a handful of slides here. This is mostly for discussion, and want to be able to address your thoughts, concerns, questions. So I'm going to invite everyone to feel free to speak up and ask questions. And we will also be paying attention to the chat box. So either way, if you want to start your question with a chat and then I can call on you, or we can just have people chime in and just use good civil discourse in speaking together. So we're going to start. This is our overview of some of the topics we're going to touch on. STEP exam, clerkship issues, what if you scored below average in your EM rotation, what if you had to take time off or you pursued another degree during medical school, and then finally talking about some issues with professionalism. All right, so can you guys still hear me? It looked like I disappeared for a second.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, it just looked like it cut off. I apologize.
You did disappear for about like 30 seconds and then came back on, so.
Okay, that was very strange. I've actually never, despite our rural New Hampshire internet, I've never had that happen before, so please forgive me. Oh, I had another, sorry, that reminds me. I should apologize for the fact that I do live in rural New Hampshire and do have questionable internet at times, but it tends to work pretty well, so hopefully this will not happen again. I also wanted to let you know that in addition to those other titles you saw, Director of Emergency Medicine Education, Wilderness Medicine Fellowship Director, Associate Professor, etc., my favorite title that I carry is that of mom. So you should all know that I am a mom of 4 children, ages 2 This is really strange. Can you hear me again?
Yeah.
I have never had it cut in and out like this. So I was anticipating potential interruptions from children, but I have never had my internet be this spotty before. Okay. So you guys are welcome to give me some encouragement whether you're having issues seeing me on the chat. I know someone just chimed in and spoke up that that was a problem. And I'm not exactly sure why that has happened. Hopefully it won't happen again. I hope there's nothing I'm doing on my computer with the screen share that's leading to that. Okay, so we'll go back to the screen share. I may need to ask for some help from Hugo. So Hugo,
Yes.
I'm not sure. It almost seems like Zoom itself is somewhat unstable for me right now. And I don't know if you have any tips. It just doesn't seem to be as much of an internet issue. I've never had this problem. All right. We will push forward and hope that this technology issue doesn't continue. As I said, I did anticipate an occasional knock on the door from the 2-year-old as an interruption, but I did not anticipate the problem of the technology here. So I just want to open the chat box again and make sure, can everyone see the PowerPoint okay? And can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
All right, I apologize for that. Okay, so forgive me for that interruption. But again, these are the topics that we're going to be going over, and kind of big picture is talking about what to do if you have any of these red flags on your application. So we're going to start with exam scores. And this is obviously something that means a lot to many of us because plenty of research has shown that focusing too much on standardized exams does disadvantage certain populations. And I, for one, am going to be happy when the step 1 scores go to pass fail. So as you know, it's this year, probably next year, and then not clear if the year after is going to be dealing with this. However, I would venture to say that the fact that the USMLE has made the choice to go to pass fail on step 1 has probably made a lot of programs around the country question whether they should be placing so much emphasis on it even now and next year. So I think that that will be to the advantage of anyone dealing with a low score. And what do we mean by a low score? So I think if you look through a lot of the research, and one of the best resources that I can refer you to, and you're even welcome to check out now as you're listening to this, is the Advising Students Committee in Emergency Medicine At-Risk Applicants Applying Guide. So that's where a lot of my data for this is coming from, as well as the EMRA Applying in Emergency Medicine booklet that was published last year. And both of those guidelines are based on as much evidence as is available to us in advising. So there's lots of people with lots of experience, and expert consensus is great, but we actually have done a reasonable amount of research in the field of advising to try and get you the most accurate information possible. So in looking at, again, if you Google CORD EM Advising Students Committee and you go to their resource page, there's a list of different applying guides, and one is the at-risk applicants. And generally the cutoff that they use in terms of a low score is a 225 is kind of the number for step 1. That above 220, 225, I've seen kind of both of those numbers thrown out. You should feel confident that you won't be screened out, and that's a reasonable score that will help you to get interviews, you know, between 220 20 and some of those super high scores, obviously there's gradations, but what we run into and what we see is that there are programs historically, and again, that will be changing, that use a filter on ERAS. So they are actually able to screen below a certain step score, and they don't review applications below that number. So the lower end where you're more at risk is 210, and then there's kind of this gray zone, 210 to 220, which is less likely to be fully screened out, but it's not as competitive of a score. So what should you do if you have a score that's below 210 or potentially below 220 on step 1? So the first thing to keep in mind, and that's a difficult issue this year, is in the past, we have always advised our students who have a lower score to take step 2 as early as possible so that their new step 2 score or their step 2 score is available on the day that applications in ERAS become available to the programs. So historically that's been about September 15th. Now we've pushed it forward this year to October 21st. So if you are trying to get a step 2 exam before upload day, then you have a little bit more time. However, I understand that taking step 1 or step 2 has been horrendously difficult in these times. So I think that programs are going to be understanding about the fact that taking step in the era of COVID is a totally different ballgame, that there are complications that we've never dealt with before. If you aren't able to get that higher step 2 score before October 21st, there's probably a little more understanding about that. But again, having a goal to study hard, do your best, do well on step 2 before your and have a score resulted and in your application before October 21st would be ideal. What are some other things to think about when dealing with lower step scores? So again, we all have reviewed the research looking at the poor correlation between a step 1 score and clinical performance. I think there's been increasing awareness of this. Again, why a major factor in why step 1 is going to pass fail is because we have good evidence saying it doesn't correlate. What does it correlate with? It correlates with passing your board exam. So if you're a good test taker, then you're a good test taker, and that's what we can infer from standardized tests. But the fact is that you will have to take board exams and recertification exams throughout your medical career. I just took my 10-year recertification exam. It was as poorly correlated with my clinical work skills as it was the first time around, and really is, you know, a test of what kind of fund of knowledge I have, but also just my ability to take tests. And that's, you know, I'm many years into my career now, and that's still something that I'm dealing with. So that's partially why we've always looked at these scores as something to make sure your applicants can pass their specialty board exams. So the other good thing to know about the modern era of applicants in emergency medicine is there is a big push now for what's called holistic review. So not just using those filters, not just focusing on a step score or on AOA, but taking a more holistic view. And I think that is a really important part of building a more diverse workforce in emergency medicine and recognizing there's more to a person than just their step score or just their AOA status. So we talked about taking step 2 early to try and show that you can pass exams, that you can learn from mistakes. If you didn't study appropriately the first time around, that you developed better study habits, that you were able to do better on step 2, and that, you know, your program director doesn't have to worry about you failing your emergency medicine boards, which I think is what, you know, one of the reasons this has been a screening tool is programs want to know that you're going to pass your board exam, that you're going to be able to practice emergency medicine. So other things that you can do if a low step score is one of the red flags that you're dealing with. you can make sure that you're applying smart. And I'm sure, hopefully you've all heard this, apply smarter, not harder. But there's all different programs across the country, and they look for different qualities in their applicants. So if you're looking for a high-powered academic center that's really focused on high board exams and, you know, high research productivity, and you have no research and a step score of 201, then that might not be a good match. But if you are looking to be a great clinician and have, you know, great clinical acumen and really be a great community emergency doctor in the place where you choose to live, then, you know, you can probably find a really solid program, and it may just not be the most world-renowned in name, and it may not be as focused on only recruiting students who have 260 on their step score. And you can imagine you might not be happy, you know, trying to fit yourself a square peg into a round hole if one program is really focused on high scores and that's not what you're all about, then maybe that's not a match anyway. So finding a place that's right for you and values the things that you value is an important part in this applying smarter, not harder process. So hopefully many of you have lots of experience with the EMRA match website and are familiar with how to navigate that and the filters. So just as a kind of commentary, if you guys can chime in with your voices or on chat, let me know if you are familiar with using the different filters on the EMRA match website. Oh, Dennis, hello.
Hello.
So good to have you join us. Good.
Sorry, I had to join late. It's West Coast time. It's a little early for us who work.
I understand. And East Coast time, it's a little late. So it's tough, but it's neat to be able to bring people from all across the country into one space. So Dennis, just to bring you up to speed, we were talking about the red flag of what to do if you have a low step score. And so we were saying, you know, 220, 225, above that, most programs won't screen you out, and that seems to be a safer area. But it's that below 210 certainly seems to be historically more of an issue, and then kind of this gray zone of 210 to 220 that can go either way. So we talked about the importance of trying to take step 2 early. And now we're talking about trying to use the tools that you can to find programs who aren't going to screen you out based on your step 1 score. So I had actually just asked everyone to kind of chime in and give me a little feedback on how familiar you are with that EMRA match website and using the different filters on there to find programs based on the different criteria that they use. So again, you can answer in the match or in the chat category, or you can answer verbally, but just want to, it's hard sometimes to have these conversations so one-sided. So I just want to make sure you guys are with me and see if you're familiar with the tool that I'm referring to. All right, so for those of you who have not used this EMRA match tool, it is really important for any of the topics that we're touching on in terms of potentially having red flags. What this tool lets you do is each program enters by choice its own data and lets you know some of the criteria they use for selecting interviewees out of their applicant pool. And so you can choose to look
Sarah?
I'm here again. I have never had this problem, and this is just, I'm going to switch. Can you guys hear me if I use the computer audio?
Yeah, that works.
Okay, the only variable in my presentation tonight is that I've not used the headphones before. I have never had this strange Zoom problem before. Okay. And the slides are probably, sorry, each time this happens, it's like a glitch in Zoom itself, and I have to restart my screen share, and like I have to log back on again. Dennis, do you know, are you able to screen, or do you have, you may not have the slides actually.
Let me pull the slides. I can screen share them and advance them.
Yeah,
I'm using my phone to call in. My internet at work is a little sketchy, so it may cut out, but I think for now, let me try it.
The other option is to have Hugo, who's at SAEM, try it. But I'm wondering if me not screen sharing would help this problem possibly.
Yeah, let me pull up the slides. Give me 2 seconds, and then just keep on talking. I'll bring the slides up.
All right. Okay, I apologize again for the technical difficulties, but for anyone who has not used the EMRA Match website, it's super useful to look for programs who are a good fit for you. And so again, you can see who is screening by step scores, and some will say we don't use step for screening. Some will say we have a cutoff at 200 or 210. You know, maybe some super competitive programs might tell you they cut off at 220 or 225. But if you know that, then you can bypass applying to programs that use, you know, higher screening tools or screening scores on step one, and apply to programs that show that they're welcoming to students who maybe don't have the highest step score, or even do they consider students who have failed step one, and that will give you a different pool. You know, so sometimes when I am advising a student, maybe they have multiple red flags, then I look for, you know, programs who are welcoming to international students, programs who look at applicants who've failed step one, programs who have, again, perhaps a more holistic view on the applicant and don't just screen everyone out based on these few criteria. And that will give you, again, an option of where to apply smarter, not just to, you know, say, okay, I've got to apply to 100 programs. That, you know, that's not necessarily the best approach. Apply to programs that are looking for what you have to offer. There are some other tools in addition to that EMRA match with the filters. And again, make sure you play with those filters, get familiar with them, use them to find the best match for what kind of applicant you are. In addition, I know our school uses a program called Texas Star. I think the school itself has to sign up for students to be able to use it. I don't know that you can use it individually, but has anyone used Texas Star to find out, you know, what level of competitiveness you are and what kind of programs might be a good fit for you? Anyone use Texas Star? Okay. So that one's fairly new to our school, and I actually have less experience using it, but I know our Dean of Advising is a huge advocate, and she feels like they've done quite a good job collecting data and trying to point students in a reasonable direction. The other place to look is the NRMP itself. So the match has been collecting data. NRMP is who runs the match. And they also have a website. Hopefully you have reviewed some of the statistics there that will, again, kind of address some of these issues about competitiveness generally, and some of the specifics in terms of how many programs do you need to apply to and so forth, based on certain things like step scores. All right, so Dennis, if you want to advance the slides, and we've kind of touched on a few different things about step one, which is the next slide. So you can go back to the step one. I was just going to invite any questions. So we talked about low scores. I think the same issues apply in terms of failures. Is you really want to apply SMART, make sure that you are applying only to programs who have indicated that they are willing to invite applicants who have a failure. And the failure is, you know, it's definitely a red flag for a lot of program directors. And so that's something that you want to kind of, both with the low score and with the failure in particular, you want to own that problem. And you'll hear this is kind of a theme for all of these issues, is I think a lot of programs can be understanding that there are circumstances that are unique for each applicant, and there may be things that were happening in your life that led to this low score or this failure. So your personal statement, for instance, may be a place to explain those circumstances. But what everyone will be looking for, if you have any red flag, including a low or step score or a failure, is what have you learned from this? So the worst thing you can do is sound defensive or show that you haven't learned from this experience, but you're trying to blame things outside of yourself. The best thing that you can do is own the failure, own the low score, say, look, you know, this was going on in my life, and this is why I think that my study strategy wasn't what it should have been, and this is what I've learned from it. And now I am more organized, I am more focused, I have developed tools and tapped into resources that have helped me identify, you know, test-taking weaknesses that I had when I faced this struggle at the beginning. And now I feel like I've learned so much, I've grown so much, and I'm actually grateful that I had this challenge because now I'm a better person for it. And that's the kind of growth mindset that most programs are looking for. That really applies to every one of these challenges that we're talking about. So you'll hear some repetition here, but owning your red flag and telling the programs, this is what I've learned and this is why I'm a better person for it. And I might even be a better applicant than someone who just breezed through all these things because I'm tougher and I've worked harder and I've learned to, you know, take my mistakes and make them into a success. And that is really one of the overarching themes about, you know, having any of these red flags on your application, is show them that you're a better person because of it. You got through a tough experience that maybe no one else had. You know, something was going on in your life during your step one, but you learned, you grew, and now you are a stronger, better person. All right, so does anyone have questions about this topic in particular of the low step score or a USMLE or complex failure?
I have a quick question. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. Do you think, and you might have kind of already answered this, but do you think that residency programs are going to kind of take into consideration repeated cancellations of step one because of COVID as kind of one of the explanations for maybe a lower score? Did you hear that question?
I'm hoping that Dennis can field it because I had that strange Zoom issue again. Dennis, did you hear the whole question?
I did. I mean, I think it's hard to say. I mean, I think you have to, you know, I think it could cut either way because, you know, on one hand, it's a super stressful experience. COVID is unpredictable, and I think it's been stressful for everybody. On the other hand, you know, you could see a program director thinking, well, if it was canceled, that means you had more time to study, so it should at least allow you to do the same, if not somewhat better. So I think you really have to have a good explanation if you're going to say the repeated postponement really threw you off your game. I think you sort of, yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions about dealing with low step scores or step failures? I guess the other thing I will throw in is, you know, there are certain things that lead us as advisors to start thinking about, do you need to think of a backup plan? And I would say a lower step score isn't necessarily one of those things, especially if you did well on step 2 and you have a strong clinical performance. But a step failure plus any other, questions of fund of knowledge or performance might be one of those things that would make an advisor start to, push you to consider a backup plan. And by backup plan, we mean dual applying in emergency medicine plus another specialty that is historically less competitive. Not that it's any less valuable of a specialty, and don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to undermine that, but certain specialties, including internal medicine and family medicine, just have a lot more spots to applicant ratios. And so those are sometimes areas that an emergency advisor might suggest as a backup plan for dual advising. And that's another topic that we'll bring up in some of these other red flags. So
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think if you have one thing that happened, I think it's sort of owning it and sort of showing improvement, showing it was aberrancy, I think is not a death, sort of not deadly. But I think if you have multiple of these red flags, dual applying is probably a really good idea because, at some point, the program directors are not going to be willing to take a risk in terms of, just they start seeing, if they see a pattern, then, I think it's sort of, for them, they have to worry about if, their board passage rates, other stuff. And once they take you into the program, having an empty spot in the program is really painful for everybody. So they are very, sort of, if they take you in, they want you to succeed, and sort of multiple, I think, of these factors together makes it a lot tougher for them to sort of think it was a one-off.
right. Thanks for clarifying, Dennis. And again, I'm not saying that a low step score alone would lead you to that, but again, particularly like a failure plus, maybe having to retake a clerkship or a preclinical course, again, a combination of these things might be a reason for dual applying. So there's a question here from Karen asking about how much of an improvement on step 2 would help show that you have a good testing ability. So yes, they will be able to see both scores. And so talking about this screening tool, there's actually, if you use some of the resources that I mentioned, either that EMRA has a book and it's completely available online on student advising, and then also on this topic especially, there's the advising guide for, it is titled At-Risk Applicants. And so it actually surveys programs to give you information on, who uses these different areas as a screening tool. So if you look at step 1 failures, about just above 50% of programs reported that they do use that as a screening tool. That means that there's almost 50% of programs who don't. So you want to find out who are those programs, and you want to focus on them if you have a step 1 failure. And then with the minimum score, it's again about 50% use a minimum score, 50% do not. And so just having, information to guide you is going to be valuable. Don't apply to schools that are screening you out for step 1. And then among that other 50% that are happy to look at you for either having failed or having a low step 1 score, they will feel better seeing that you scored well on step 2. Now, keeping in mind, step 2 scores tend to be higher number-wise than step 1. Again, if you keep that 225 number that we used before, that's, would at least be reassuring. But I certainly regularly see students who struggled on step 1, maybe had something in the 200 to 210 range, and then are able to score in the 230s and 240s. One, because it's a very different test. It does test clinical knowledge. And 2, often people just develop better test taking skills between the 2 exams. And so that can be very reassuring. But I don't think everyone expects you to score 240 or 250 on your step 2, but just giving that reassurance, as Dennis said, that you're not going to struggle to pass your boards, and that they will be able to help you launch a successful career is what's important to your program directors. And so just showing that solid ability to pass your exams is what they're looking for. I hope that answers your question, Karen. All right, any last questions on STEP scores? So let's move on to the next topic. And again, a lot of the things we mentioned will be universal here. So, so struggling in an EM clerkship. So if you have failure on an EM clerkship or on a non-EM clerkship, or you have a poor clerkship grade, or had some negative comments on a clerkship rotation, those can be a real red flag. Now, I will say of this list, probably the most detrimental is a clerkship failure. And I have seen that be a real issue in both of my personal experience and, again, reviewing the data. Failing a clerkship is definitely a screening. I think about 20% of programs refer to using clerkship failures as a screening. But again, that still leaves plenty of programs who don't. So tips for things having to do with this. First of all, you need to read your dean's letter. You need to know every comment that's in there, and you need to, again, own the comments that are there. So this is, again, that same message that we had before. You don't want to be defensive. You don't want to argue that, you know, those people evaluating you just didn't know you, didn't see you, they gave you the wrong information. It's much better to look inside, see what might have led to those comments that are on your dean's letter, if there's something negative on it, and then let people know, potentially if it's significant enough in your personal statement. But if it's, you know, not a major issue, at least be prepared for when interviews come to be able to explain what you've learned, why you see some of those comments might actually apply to you, and you have now addressed that, and that you're better because of it. Again, a huge red flag for me in any of these issues is not the issue itself, but it is the inability to be introspective and to learn and grow from it. Being too defensive is really, for me, a huge red flag when I'm talking to an applicant. Dennis, did you have anything you wanted to share?
Yeah, I mean,
In this area?
I don't know if things have changed. I don't think I ever got a copy of my dean's letter. I don't know if people now routinely get a copy of their dean's letter. If they do, that's great, I agree. But if not, I think it's just, yeah, I think just not being too defensive, being mature about it, owning it, and sort of showing what you've done to fix that problem or address the issue.
So I will say that of these, the advising guidelines from the CORD group does put the clerkship failure in one of those kind of high risk categories. So that is probably, of the things we're talking about today, that may be one of the more concerning things that could come up. But again, not every program screens on that. It's just, it can be an issue. So anyone have questions or specifics that they'd like to have addressed on? And again, these are not your EM clerkship, but your core clerkships that you did during your third year or required fourth year clerkships that may be on your transcript. What to do if you either failed or had a very poor grade in one of those. Any questions? Feel free to chime in or ask on the chat. If not, we'll move on to the next one. And feel free, if we move on and you still had a question, you can throw that into the chat box at any time. All right, Dennis, do you want to forward to the next topic? All right. I'm talking a lot. Dennis, do you want to take the lead on this one, or you want me to just keep going and you get to share your insights?
Go for it. I like being the commentator. So
Excellent. Okay. So we talked about what to do if you have below average evaluations in other categories. Now we're talking about what if you did not do as well on your EM rotation as you wanted. So that's particularly important this year because you guys are dealing with a very unique situation we've never encountered before, which is everyone in the country is doing one EM rotation. And I hope you all got that message. That's the plan. Everyone in the country is doing one rotation. If you have a home residency, that's where you rotate, and that's where everyone is expecting your SLO to come from. If you're from a school that does not have an EM residency, then hopefully you've been able to work things out as what's probably not been well named, but historically has been called an orphan applicant, and you've been able to find a spot to rotate with someone that has an EM residency. So I know it's a challenging and complicated year, but everyone's in the same boat. That's one thing working for you, and everyone has one SLO basically. So what happens if you're sensed and you don't know what's on your SLO, but you know what's on your EM grade and your evaluation? What if you got some negative feedback on your evaluation? What if you got a pass instead of a high pass or an honors? What if you're pretty certain that you didn't mesh well with some faculty and you might have things on your SLO that, you know, might be below average? What should you do? So I've heard different suggestions on how to get a sense of this issue. Hopefully, what I will say is hopefully you have a connection within the department where you rotate, either your home department or someone who has sponsored you to come do a rotation. And you had someone that you felt was your advocate and who can give you good advising and good feedback to help address any of these things. And, you know, obviously you would want to have that during the rotation so that you can respond to it. But if it happens that, you know, you got to the end of rotation, you weren't able to address all the concerns, or you just weren't able to overcome some of these setbacks that you had, and you have a lower score than you want, again, I think the best thing that you can do is be reflective. Try and find out even after the fact, you know, what was it that led to this? If you feel like the formative feedback on your evaluation wasn't adequate, I would actually dig deeper. You know, try to go back to the clerkship director, try to talk to faculty and find out what could you have done better, and genuinely take that to heart and try to see how you can use it to become a better person and a better clinician. Again, this is all about owning your mistakes and growth mindset. So this is another thing that if this is your red flag, talking about it, what you've learned from it, showing that you're a better person in your personal statement may be appropriate. So another topic, and I've heard this presented at CORD, and this is a little bit controversial, probably beyond the fact for most of you, because I imagine most of you have done your rotation by now, but it has been suggested that when asking for your SLO, it's not unreasonable to ask the faculty member in charge of that, do you feel you can write a strong SLO for me? You're not asking them to tell you what they're putting on the SLO, but you want to get a sense of, you know, can you write a strong SLO for me? Now it's a little strange this year because, you know, you're not able to pick and choose, and maybe if someone told you on an away rotation, we can't really write a strong SLO, that might motivate you to go do another rotation, and that's not the case this year. So this lecture that I heard 2 years ago may not apply at all this year, but even though you can't find out what's on your SLO, it's not unreasonable to at least try to get a sense from the faculty, you know, how they viewed you overall. Again, that should be in your evaluation, but talking to them, trying to gain information is still can be valuable for you, for your growth as a clinician and a physician. Dennis, anything else you would say along this topic of?
No, I mean, I think you should be getting, I think most places are pretty above board on their feedback to you, and, you know, sort of your grade will generally reflect how you did on the rotation.
All right. Well, let's move on to the, oh, sorry. Anyone have specific questions about this one? You guys are a quiet bunch. All right. So we'll move on to the next topic. extended training. Now, this is an interesting one because at my institution at Dartmouth, this is actually very common. We have a lot of students who pursue MD, MBA degrees, so they'll go to our Tuck Business School at Dartmouth, and we have, like every school, we have a certain cohort of MD, PhDs. So for me, in my background, I actually think those can be quite valuable. Or an MD, MPH is another pathway that a lot of schools can offer. And so I think it's interesting that this can be in the section of, potential red flags. But there is sometimes a question, depending on the timing of the path that you took, did you do all of your rotations and rotate in emergency medicine and then take 2 years off and now you're coming back into clinical medicine? I think the one thing that programs will want to know is, are you ready to jump back into intern year? And so anything you can do to really convince them, sure, I took these 2 years off to get my MBA, but I just did, another EM rotation, a month in the ICU, and I'm going to be, packing in some really high quality stuff at the end of my 4th year so that I hit the ground running my internship. I think for those kind of dual degrees, it's all about arranging your rotations to really convince the program you're going to hit the ground running. You're not going to come in 2 years out of clinical medicine and not remember how to write a prescription or how to give a tiered differential diagnosis, that you're going to be ready to go when you hit the ground. So that's one topic. Dennis, anything else to add in terms of people with dual degrees?
I think dual degrees are generally seen as a positive. I wouldn't worry too much about it. I think it's generally not a problem. I mean, it could be an explanation as to why you may not have done as well on, sort of third-year rotation or something if you're coming back after that. But I think they're generally viewed, I don't think, as a red flag.
Right. So in general, I think that can be a great strength. And you just want to make sure people know you're ready to come in. And again, I guess the only thing I would say is, as you're promoting yourself, make sure you're not just focused on your PhD work or on your MBA or, these kind of, but you show the whole person that you are, you are still all in to be a great intern, a great clinician when you start your residency. Probably a more concerning thing is if you had to take academic leave. So plenty of people have things come up, whether it's family with healthcare issues or personal health issues, other issues that come up, and you have to, at our school, we call it a split. So you might have to split one of your preclinical years because you had to retake courses, or you had to take leave for some other personal reason. And then those can come up during your clinical years as well. Now, interestingly, again, we actually have a pretty big cohort of people who don't finish med school in 4 years at my school. And it's mostly because people have so many outside interests. So we have a lot of people who split 4th year because they want to go do international work, because they want to focus more on their research. And so I think it does come down to why you're doing it. And if you can demonstrate, well, this was a super valuable, great experience that led to me splitting, either a preclinical year or a 3rd or 4th year versus, any concerns that someone might have that you took an extended path because you were struggling to keep up with the content. I think those are two very different scenarios. So in terms of if you did need to take a leave of absence for any personal reasons, that may be something you want to address in a personal statement. And again, the theme of the night is to just have a good explanation of what you learned from that experience. All right.
Hi, Dr. Crockett. I had a question about that.
Yes.
My name is Austin. I am an MD PhD student. So
Okay.
in that, so I took 6 years is anything before considered an academic training was I was not opted.
Sorry, Austin, that was hard for me to understand, but that may just be on my end.
Okay. Let me try in the chat.
And Dennis, if you heard it clearly, go ahead and chime in.
I also didn't. I just heard 6 years as opposed to 4. I think it's fine as long as you have a good explanation for it. I don't think it's a big deal. I just want to do a time check. I think we have 2 minutes.
Okay.
So,
They did tell us we don't have to wrap up right at the end. We'll try and get through this then. So, but I think you said, Austin, that you're an MD PhD student. So that's a whole different category, and everyone expects that to be, you know, a certain number of extra years to accomplish that. So that's not in the academic leave category. That's in the dual degrees. And I agree with Dennis that in general is a strength, not a weakness.
Okay, thank you. I guess I was just concerned about that option on ERAS about clicking, you know, is this a interrupted or extended? Is it that I still fill that out and it's not a red flag, or I don't fill that out?
That's actually a good question. I don't know the answer to, because I assume you opted into MD PhD at the time of accepting your medical school appointment. That's how most of them work.
Mine was actually midway through, so
Okay.
no. It was just a decision during third year.
I guess you would click extended, but it would be very clear to them that you are graduating with a PhD, and just make sure that is clear to them.
Okay.
But again, that should be a strength, not a weakness. So professionalism challenges, I would say of everything that we're talking about tonight, these are the toughest ones. So anything that's academic misconduct, criminal history, those can be a big deal. And I would say that in particular may be one of these considered dual applying. If you actually have a formal letter, you know, in your file in the dean's office about academic misconduct, that's going to be a red flag. But if they graduate you, then clearly it was addressed, and the school feels that, you know, they can confidently say that you're going to be a good physician. So this again falls in this category of own it, explain what you learned, but know that professionalism issues are probably one of the hardest red flags to overcome in my experience. Dennis, anything to share on that topic? Okay, and then unexplained time off, that kind of follows into the same category we just talked about. If you have to take an academic leave or you have to take gaps within med school, that's one topic. And then I think they're saying, what about in your CV? People still kind of add up the years. I would not try or expect to get away with hiding something in your timeline. Like if there's a gap in your CV that you just don't talk about, people might ask you, well, what happened between, you know, 2012 and 2014? I don't see anything on your CV that explains those years. People really do kind of track just what you've been doing over time. I wouldn't expect to try and hide, number one, any academic misconduct or any criminal history or any major gaps in your timeline. But again, show growth, show progress over time, and own anything that might be one of these red flags. And that's really going to speak a lot to your character and to a program's, you know, yes, I feel confident about bringing this person here because they're a better person because of these challenges. They're not someone we have to worry about. All right, so I think that covers all of our red flags we wanted to address. I know that our hour is up, but if anyone has other questions that they want to toss in, I'm happy to do more QA here. And it seems like maybe the chat box is the best way, because for some reason I'm having trouble hearing people. All right. So, any other questions? I'm sorry I didn't get to hear more from you guys directly. It's exciting to know you're from so many different places around the country. And I hope that despite all of these challenges, you all feel like you're gaining something from this once in a century or more experience of living through some of the greatest upheaval our world has experienced in centuries. So know that we're all here for you and cheering for you, and we're optimistic that you will do well despite the challenges that you're facing, and you're going to go out and make the world a better place. Thank you for doing what you're doing.